So the next film we're going to review is Apples by Christos Nikou. Steph, why don't you tell us about that film?
Yep, so basically within this film Apples, if you have seen anything by Yorgos Lanthimos, you'll be kind of familiar with the kind of Greek absurdism that you get here. It's pretty much a story about this worldwide pandemic that is causing amnesia in citizens around the world. And so you have these people who end up having a sharp shock to the head and end up not being able to crawl any details of where they are, who they are, or where they're meant to be going and who their family is. So a lot of them end up in hospital with their images circulating around to try and find their family. And when they're not, when there's no one there to claim them, whether or not they don't have family, or it's one of those whether their family's been affected by this kind of amnesiac pandemic, they end up going through a recovery program which gives them a new identity and helps them build a new life essentially. But it's all regulated through this program, so you kind of have to live your life in a certain way to establish this identity. You don't have any leeway about how to live your life. You have to do certain tasks throughout the days to try and prove that you're building a persona as such, but everyone's sort of building the exact same replication, the exact same image of each other. So you've got this part of the world that is kind of trying to live through the system of what it means to be human, and how when you lose that part of your memory, what how society says that you should rebuild yourself and what it means to be reintegrated into society. So it's quite a wacky kind of, it's part of what I would say is quite weird cinema. It's existential, it's very philosophical, but it's one of those films that I think we have this issue when we talking about arty and experimental films. I think not something that I've actually seen yet, but I think that sparked controversy when I'm thinking of ending things with Kaufman about the barrier between art house cinema and kind of pretentious cinema. What's the difference? What's the collide? And I think that Apples is quite good at re-establishing the kind of the functions of kind of art house cinema that is there to tell quite a central story in between it all, and it's not there to be complex for the sake of being complex, is what I would say about it. But I don't know. I really enjoyed the film. It's everything that I quite like about cinema. I don't know how you all felt about it. What did you think of the film, Jim?
I got a lot out of this. So it's been kind of rattling around in my head for a bit. So I'm going to have this weird collection of coherent thoughts and incoherent thoughts because I saw it a few months ago, and I really liked it. And I think part of it is it's one of these films where it's interesting what you brought up at the end there, Steph, because part of what I enjoyed about this is I think it's one of these films where you could be teasing out all sorts of things from it for weeks, really, on the basis of the way this is structured and some of the things that the Aris character has to, some of the tasks that he has to undertake. In particular, it's interesting the bit you mentioned about while these people who have suffered this memory loss are needing to rebuild their life, they're basically given these prescribed tasks by the medical staff. And the thing that's really quite striking about it is these ridiculous deadpan photos that folk need to take to prove they've done something, right? And it's basically it's evidence of existence rather than feeling anything or personality or any sort of genuine human connection. And that's kind of emphasised later in the film through an interaction that Aris has. In some ways, like me, maybe it's just me, I took it, certain parts of it, particularly just one segment where he's flipping through a photo album of all these photos. To me, it felt like a bit of a comment on kind of modern social media and kind of it acting as a substitute for anything genuinely meaningful, quite frankly. But the kind of absurdist deadpan way this is presented, first of all, I got a lot out of that. That's just kind of like a sort of a tone that I think I get along with very well. But the manner in which it is presented, I found it does that thing. Like, we've spoken a lot about films that balance tone very well, right? But I think Apples is another one because it does that balancing of this absurdist, quite humorous way of looking at it, and at the same time, it's actually kind of heartbreaking. They're going through all these things, going to parties because they've been instructed to, but you can just tell from Anis's face, it feels none of it. Feels absolutely none of it. And again, it's another one where that script blends with the performances to really kind of bring home the emotions, or in this case, in some instances, the lack thereof, to be honest. So I got a lot out of it. I think this will probably get a lot of people looking at it and they'll see the word pandemic and then probably turn off, to be honest, or like not pay attention. But I actually think that what it's got going on, that framing of it is very much in the background for me. I think that the way it kind of looks at human connection, emotion, and the things that make you who you are, right, and the role that memory plays in that, I think is extremely interesting. And I think that's where the crux of the film is for me.
So it's one that I would like to watch again, because I watched it, my first thing was like, I'm all over the place on this. There are scenes I think are very interesting. There's a sudden twist moment, which is tremendous, and then not tremendous, because it's played so... It's partially to do with the actor, who's Aris Servatalis, who is very lanky, has very laconic tendencies, has a great trimmed beard, and when he's doing the twist, he has like such long legs that his movements are so carefully delineated and look as though if you weren't looking at his face, you'd be like, oh, someone's having a good time. But you're looking at his face going, the guy's an autopilot, he's not feeling a thing. I do think that he's a brilliant camera subject. So when he's doing small things like peeling the apple, he's really interesting to watch peel an apple. That's not something you can say about lots of actors. So the film has that going for it. The social media aspect to it, which at first was kind of passed me by entirely, but it's the moment when Aris meets Anna at the cinema, and there's a woman following who's also part of this new identity program. And what she does is they all take photos with the poster of the film that they've just seen as one of the tasks that they've been set. And the woman after Anna and Aris takes it as a selfie. The other two put it down and put it on a timer and pose with the poster. What this woman does after them is takes it just literally like a selfie, like anybody would do in daily life. And that's the moment where it's like, okay, yes, it's a social media allegory. As a social media allegory, I'm not very interested in it. It's one of these movies that plays on negative space, a little bit like Limbo, where there's so much negative space above them, and it's a bit of a comment on the fact that they're amnesiac, as though because they're amnesiac, they're not full subjects, they don't deserve a fully proportioned frame for them in, and I'm like, I'm not interested in that either. I will say, however, that the Yorgos Lanthimos comparisons, and I would say also the Sangari comparisons are worthwhile, and they're worthwhile in this way, because the lead actor has starred in 2 of Lanthimos' movies. He was in Kineta and he was in Alps. The director was second assistant director on Dogtooth, and the fact that there are unclaimed amnesiacs is very much like the Singles Hotel and the Lobster. Like, the Lanthimos comparison is quite a full one. I would also say that as much as I don't like parts of this film, this is a much better film than anything I've seen of Lanthimos' so far, so it's got that going for it. It does have lots of little scenes that suggest that it's funnier than it is. It has moments with windshield wipers, it has a moment on a swimming pool, diving board that's like a skit from Mr. Bean. It's a movie that I don't really care about, if that's not too mean to say. It has a certain understatedness, and then
I'm trying to decide whether that's not mean or incredibly mean.
I just don't really care about it. There are things like the fact that the guy who gives the tasks over the tape recorder has a voice like the voice of Saw in the Saw movies. That's funny to me in a strange way, but I can't put this together as a full, and appropriately for a movie about amnesiacs, I can't put this together as a full experience because it has lots of little curlicues and scenes that just appear like false appendages to me. So maybe I'll stop moaning about it now.
I think that the film is very allegorical, and I think when you go back to what Jim said about social media and Mark echoed that about the problem with how everything's digitalized and sent everywhere, and what is authentic anymore is one of the big questions in this. I will accept the social media. What I think that people will see that either as something that's quite a good way to explore that topic, or people will find it quite jarring. I think there's no in between there. I think that what will annoy me is if this gets compared to COVID or the COVID pandemic, which I can see coming in quite a few reviews because of, I think the word pandemic in the current situation we jump to, oh, it's a tale about COVID in a new way. I think if you watch it, it's really not anything, other than there being a pandemic. There's not really any comparison to, I think, what's happening just now. It's very much more of I was the same as Mark. I immediately kind of went back to The Lobster. That was the film that came to mind when I was watching it. So there is obviously quite a big Lanthimos influence on this, and I think like his films, it's not just kind of one core question. There's a few different parallels that you can draw from these films and different things that you can, and it's not. I think you can go down a very linear path of the question of memory and what does memory mean and how does that really make us who we are, and then I think you can go down what is that saying about how we're now broadcasting everything on social media. Are we actually living these experiences? Can we remember living them, or is it all just kind of saved on a drive somewhere to be revisited without actually having any kind of tactile recollections of those days? So I think it's one of those films that is very much quite absurd. It's very much a kind of one of those films that is not going to be an easy watch. You've kind of have to get quite focused into it if you want to get anything out of it. And not saying that, I don't think that if you don't get anything out of it, that's necessarily anything to do with you. I think it's one of those films that, either gels with you or doesn't. It's something, I think, as well as Lanthimos. I think if you're a fan of the films of Roy Anderson, you might quite like this movie. I think it goes into the existential despairs and questions that he kind of goes into, the meanings of existence and things. It's very much a film that revels in its absurdity, in a sense.
So I think the main thing, the main idea is that I did gel with it very strongly, I think. And one place where I'm not going to disagree with Mark, but I'm going to offer a counter perspective, shall we say. The social media allegory, which came through very strongly for me. I think, for me, the strength of that one, and I think what interested me in it, because, I don't want to be too old man yells at cloud about it. Like social media, you can complain about social media all day long, right? But I think what was interesting about it in this film is the fact that the film itself is kind of a drift of time and place, or at least I certainly couldn't place it as being in a particular time period. There wasn't, or certainly I don't recall any smartphones, and the instructions that they're getting delivered by the medical staff, it's done by cassette tape, and it's kind of the whole thing has got this kind of like retro aesthetic about it. And I think what I found quite striking about these photos of these experiences, where you can tell nobody is really getting anything emotional out of it, and then it's getting flipped through a photo album as opposed to like a camera roll or something. For me, it's once you take the modern aspect out of it and then the idea of any particularly modern technology, it kind of shows up quite how absurd some of this stuff is. And for me, that was an interesting way to do it, because anybody can say social media is bad, these people are not your friends, blah blah, whatever the hell you want to say about it. But I think once you take it back and you remove it from modern technology and modern trends, to me, that made a stronger statement than anything that you could say overtly, right? So for me, that's where the interest gets. And I think that's for me where it's a little bit a little bit different. I will also actually say I think I gelled this a little bit stronger than some of the work I've seen from Lanthimos, if I'm being honest. So that's probably where there's maybe a similarity there. I would say that I was probably one person where I got a lot out of this film. But as I say, to go back to what I was saying at the start, I think it's one of these things where people will find different aspects of it interesting. That's the one I kind of glommed onto, but I think other people will probably pick different things out of it, or indeed, as is the case with Mark, will find the bit that I found interesting not particularly interesting. So I think it's a movie with quite a lot of layers to it, I think, and I'd be interested to see what other people took from it.
Great. So Apples, check it out on Glasgow Film Festival.